Everybody ready?
Born that way.
You were born ready. Okay. You stay ready. Okay. The next item on today's agenda is an interview with Dr. Judy Walton. Welcome, Dr. Walton.
Hi, I'm Judy. Hi, I'm Judy.
Good morning.
Morning.
And we'll go ahead and get started. But before we do you have any pressing questions of us?
I do not. I was just remarking that I sometimes watch the public comment pieces later at night just to see what might be coming my way in our district. And this room looks a lot smaller on the video than it does in person, so.
So we will start with me, and this is a question on integrity and ethical leadership. And the question is, I'm asking you to tell us about a time when you had to make a difficult ethical decision in your leadership role. What was the situation? What did you do? And what was the outcome?
Okay. First, I want to thank you all for having me. I know I'm the only thing that stands between you and lunch, so I'll try and make it worth your while. We're confronted with those pieces every single day, and I would say not just as a superintendent, but as a teacher in the classroom, right? We're always confronted with those ethical pieces. I think a time that I would share with you is when I was principal in a middle school. We had historically taken our 8th grade students to Mackinac Island for an overnight trip. And it was all connected to standards and everything, but let's be honest, kids loved it too, right? It was a lot of fun. Well, the last year I was principal, there was a decision that was made that the kids wouldn't go overnight anymore. And they would go up and back in one day from Grand Rapids, which was a lot of time on a bus. And I am someone that typically sticks with when we've made a decision, we can argue about it in the back room, but when we make a decision, we're all going to speak with one voice. But that was one time where I felt like students were really being impacted negatively because all of the reasons that we were given for why they had to do it in one day didn't seem to make any sense to me. And so as I met with students and parents, I encouraged them to come to our board meeting and have that discussion. And I've always been someone that has elevated student voice. And I had one young man who I think now is a junior or senior in high school who just was so eloquent at the meeting and asking the board to please reconsider the decision and let the students go overnight on their trip. And they were successful. And so, and again, that may not seem big in the grand scheme of things, but I think it shows that sometimes our decisions aren't always, sometimes we can talk ourselves into our decisions being best for kids when they're really not. And so in that situation of saying my ethics and my personal integrity, where I had to be on the side of the students in that issue very respectfully, and I let people know ahead of time. But to say that it's not always the company line, so to speak.
Thank you.
What is your vision for public education in Michigan over the next 5 years? And how would you ensure measurable improvement in student outcomes statewide?
Sure. I think about it a lot in the terminology that we use in our own district. We have just started our 4th year with the theme of future stories. And I think that's applicable to every student in our state, that we want to grow their future stories. And I think that has to be our vision. And we can't do anything along the way that takes options off the table for them. It's their job to write that story. And it's also our job to sometimes help them see that future even when they can't because of things that are impacting them. So I think my vision is to invest in their future stories. And what does that mean? I think that means, one, we have to have sustainable, equitable funding that also recognizes the uniqueness of districts. Every district is unique. It has its own unique challenges, its own unique opportunities, and we vary a lot in size and location. Because I'm in a small and rural district right now, I would tell you that I think that also means less red tape, less categoricals or competitive grants, because it's very hard for us to compete for that funding. And I think just overall, it still matters the zip code of a child as to what kind of education they get. And that's still not okay. And so I think I think funding is one piece of that. But we have to make sure that when we say all kids, we really actually mean all kids. I think the second piece would be, and I think this came out also in the data you collected from stakeholders in this process, is there has to be more of a connection between the department and the districts and teachers and students. From our perspective right now, it feels a bit fragmented. We're very closely tied to our ISD, and so I think we would need to leverage ISDs to help make that happen more. Because there's with 56, 57 of them, that's a more doable thing. But I think the MDE has to lead. We have to be out in front and saying, who cares if there's 500, 600, 700, 800 districts out there? We are all one, because we all believe that kids are depending on us and we want the best for them. And so I think that's another thing that needs to happen in the 3 to 5 years, is to build on the great work that's already happening, but to say we need to be out in front, making those connections, helping districts network with each other. Because great ideas are everywhere in this state, but if we can't connect people to them, they sit in silos. And a silo will be the death of great education across the state. And I think the third thing is more choice and voice for our students. I think I was in the classroom when the MMC came to pass. And our district didn't have to change a lot because our internal requirements were fairly similar to what the MMC said in terms of numbers of years in the particular content areas. We didn't dictate exactly what you had to take. So we had less revisions to make. But what we saw is that it really impacted elective choices and things like CTE and things like work-based learning, where kids felt like now they were really locked into a very specific course. And if you know how to play that game, great, you're going to be super successful at it. But I think it also really dampens some of the creativity and love of learning that our kids had. And so I think we have to provide more choices for them, not let go of rigor, not saying we don't want you to be able to compete, but we've got to figure out more ways to help all kids have more of their own voice heard in their path to a diploma.
This next question is about deep educational and systems experience. How has your experience as an educator informed your approach to system level leadership? Share an example where your teaching and educational leadership experience influenced a district or state policy.
Sure. I kind of view myself as a systems person, and I would sort of accentuate both pieces, because I think sometimes people think of systems as not being people-oriented, but they are. And they're put into place because nothing can depend on any one specific person. Those systems have to work whether I'm sitting there or somebody else is sitting there. So I would say one example as a superintendent was the first year I was there, like in many districts, there were some big feelings about the dress code. And as with many schools, the dress code was fairly sexist. Probably hadn't been touched in a long time, because sometimes it feels like the third rail. And so I just said to the board, I think we need to tackle this, because I'm listening to kids and I'm listening to parents. And this may not be a big issue for our educators right now, except they hate to have to enforce it. So what happens is a lot of time it gets ignored, because I'd rather be teaching than talking to a kid about what they're wearing. And so we spent almost a full year talking about this in our district and building empathy with our kids, with our parents, with our teachers, with everybody to come up with a plan that everybody had to give a little, right? Nobody got everything they wanted. But to really say, how can we go about creating something that doesn't say, well, girls can do this, but boys can wear this, right? You won't find that anywhere in our dress code. It talks about, for example, whatever you're wearing on top has to meet your waistband. It doesn't matter who you are, right? And another thing that we really listened to kids on were hats. In our area, a lot of our young men especially wear baseball caps, farming caps, things like that. That was super important to them, right? We figured out with our cameras, hats were not going to make us any less safe. All right, so we dove deep into what are we worried about, and let's talk it through. So our kids can wear baseball caps now. All right, that has made a huge difference. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but for someone who hasn't been able to get a haircut in a while, or someone who that little tightness on their head just makes them feel that much more safe in school, those were very big deals to them. And so that system we put in place of listening to our students and our families and our teachers, we have used that system moving forward to do other things in our district. This past year, we had to make some tough decisions about moving kindergarten out of our elementary building into a different building because we were overcrowded. We used that same system about bringing everybody in and listening to everybody and coming up with a consensus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question asks you to describe a specific initiative that you've led that addressed educational inequities or closed opportunity gaps, and what data or feedback informed your approach, and what were the results?
Sure, thank you for that. So I did this in both the middle school I was principal in and just more recently as superintendent. So one of the things our data shows us is that between 7th and 8th grade, for whatever, and we use NWEA, so that's the data, that reading starts to drop off between 7th and 8th grade. The research also tells us that middle school is typically where, and it's not a conscious decision, but where most kids either become lifelong readers or they're not. I mean, that's just, if you can pinpoint it back, that's usually the place and time that it happens for most kids. Well, what we also learned was, as in most schools, through 5th grade, through elementary, wherever elementary ended, there was a lot of choice reading and reading time built into the day. But there wasn't that necessarily in secondary. I believe our secondary schedules reflect our values. What are we going to put in the schedule? That says what we believe is important. So last year in Harrison was the first year that we built in 30 minutes every day, 6th through 12th grade, for choice reading time. We call it Hornet Team Time, okay? So on Mondays and Wednesdays, everybody reads silently for 30 minutes. It is a beautiful thing. I go in and read a lot with kids. Kids will recommend books. You can feel the stress level come down for kids. You can feel the calm. Can I measure that? No. But I will tell you it's an amazing thing. Our guess was that we were going to start to see growth in reading, in addition to what we're doing in ELA classrooms, of course, as well. And so this past year, we in fact did see, instead of that 7th and 8th grade piece starting to go down, we saw it start to come back up again. Now, our kids, our county, Clare County, is one of the poorest counties in the state. Our kids come in, many of them with a lot of adverse childhood experiences. So some days reading is the last thing that anybody is thinking about, right? And that's the other reason we created this piece to say, we're going to put time in for you to read, put time in for you to gather your calm, and it's in the middle of the day, right, to really reset yourself. We also, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, created time where a teacher can pull up to 5 kids during that time and do some one-on-one, small group or one-on-one interventions with them just in time for whatever is happening in the classroom right then. We don't have to figure out how to see you before school. We don't have to figure out how to see you after school. We're going to do it right now. And that actually helps all kids because it helps the A student who says, this is tough, right? Calculus is tough. I need some help. And it also helps the kids who have historically struggled. So we're bridging both ends of inequity there about who gets help and when they get help.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Could you, in your career, please share with us a time you had to respond to the community or a group that felt marginalized or unheard? And in that example, could you tell us your approach to this situation or the scenario, and what did you learn from it?
Thank you for that. I believe it was in my first year as superintendent. We had some people come to a board meeting who were upset about a book that a fifth grade teacher had done during a read aloud. And there was a lot of misinformation on social media about what the book was, what the book wasn't. So the first thing was about really trying to listen to people and acknowledging that every single parent loves their child and every single parent wants the best for their child. So we have that in common. And then it was also, we had, I'm going to guess, 8 to 10 people that spoke at that meeting. And what I did was, if they were still around at the end of the meeting, I went up and spoke with them. But most were not. I reached out and asked each one of them if they'd be willing to meet with me to better, because you guys know, a board meeting is not really the place for a conversation, right? So I wanted to really hear what they had to say. It was actually a grandfather, sat with me and talked about that none of the books in our classrooms really talked about when you have an incarcerated parent. And that if I was serious about my mantra that books are both windows and mirrors, that we needed to do a better job on that. Now, I have to tell you, my experience, that was not something I had considered. And so to listen to that and then to say, will you work with me so that we can get some quality materials in, right? And so I think what I learned is it's good to listen. It's good to invite people in to have those conversations, to find the middle ground, and to really listen. And if we do that, we can usually find a way out of the issue.
I'll follow up. Speaking of unheard and marginalized groups, we in Michigan, foster kids are transferred around, and oftentimes their transcripts don't follow them. And so they often have a hard time graduating. They can't prove that they've taken the classes to graduate. And then also the biological rights to at least know what how my child is doing doesn't follow them as well. It gets lost. And so these situations, if you were directed by the board to resolve this, maybe through, I don't know, a foster care ombudsman or a half-time FTE to just kind of sort through these issues and just get them figured out. Do you think you could do that in a reasonable time?
I do, and I will tell you, in our district, we have, I couldn't tell you a percentage, but it is not uncommon for us to get foster kids in our district, right? And so, I don't want to breach any confidences, but like we've gotten some things that you might have seen on the news, and then those kids ended up coming to us, right? And so we're, first and foremost, we're trying to take care of them, right? We're meeting those basic needs for them because they are coming out of a situation in which they have either not been physically safe, emotionally safe, or whatever. So that's our first piece, is to take care of them. But I think, yes, we need to make sure that we are helping them in ways that the system may have failed them up to this point in terms of getting those pieces in place. I will also tell you that my board president is sitting here today. She came as a measure of support. She has taught me a lot about foster care. She and her husband have adopted 4 children out of foster care. So in our district, that's a very big deal.
Okay. Describe a situation where your communication style has helped resolve a conflict or build trust across a diverse group of stakeholders.
So I think when I moved to Harrison Community Schools from Forest Hills Public Schools, that was a very big difference. right? Forest Hills, at that point, we had almost 10,000 students. We were in a very affluent area in Grand Rapids. We were probably about a 70-30 district in terms of proficiency, generally speaking. Um, and a lot of it was, well, I want this for my child, I want this for my child, all great requests. But it was a lot of trying to up our game every single day to provide opportunities. And we had a lot of money support out of our district. Flash forward to Harrison Community Schools, which I love dearly, not that level of affluence at all, right? Very high poverty rate. We are in the bottom 5 in the state for parents with a bachelor's degree or above. So I had to think about what the perception might have been of me coming from Forest Hills to Harrison, right? I had a couple connections. My sister-in-law had taught in Harrison early in her career, but it was a big shift going from an urban, affluent, suburban rather, district to a small and rural. So I made some decisions early on. I didn't hang a diploma in my office, because I didn't want to do, not that I'm not proud of it, but I didn't want to do anything that might put somebody off for no reason other than, well, you went to college and I didn't, so do you think you're better than me? And so I think it's pieces like that where we really think about we need our actions to match our intent. And so I think it's about, with me, what you see is what you get. I'll meet anybody anytime and talk about something. My dad didn't even graduate from high school. He had to drop out of high school to help support his family. My sisters and I, first-gen college kids. We've never forgotten that we are no better than anybody else. And so I think in my communication style, it's just about meeting people where they are and let's move forward together.
Thank you. I have the next question. In relationship to the politics of the position of state superintendent, Michigan's political landscape is complex. Tell us about a time when you advanced an educational policy or initiative in a politically sensitive context. How did you build support while staying focused on students? Who was the opposition, and how did you work with them?
Sure. And that complexity has definitely seeped through to the local level, without a doubt, especially post-COVID. So the example I would use is, I guess it'd probably be about a year and a half or 2 years ago now, our area superintendent group made a decision to deploy a survey. It's called the Attitudes and Behavior Survey. A lot of people confuse it with MiFi. It's not. It's different than that. It's out of the Legacy Center in Midland. And we had heard from, and the Midland deploys it, I think, about every 4 years, Midland Public. But they had definitely pushback on some of the questions. The fact that it starts in 6th or 7th grade, asking for some of the data and things like that. So we made a decision that we were going to go ahead and deploy the survey because we hadn't since 2013. So we needed to figure out where our kids' strengths were in things. And then we had one of our local superintendents decide, I can't do it. It's too volatile. I can't. You guys go ahead. I'm not going to be able to do it. Okay. I mean, that hurt a little bit because we really did want to be a united front across our pieces. And it was totally, parents could opt their kids out of the survey. There were some questions, even in 6th grade, about sexual activity, because in 2013, we did have some people, unfortunately, in middle school saying that they were sexually active. And so it was to compare that data. And those questions, there were 172 questions on the survey. I would say the controversial ones were probably maybe 5, 6, 7 questions. But it did get everybody revved up when they weren't opted out. They began to take the survey and they began to tell their parents and some local officials about what was on the survey. Now, we had sent out to parents 4 different ways, information about the survey and ability to opt out, but it also shows you that you can never over-communicate. And so we had to navigate that with some people that were very angry about what they felt were intrusive questions to their children. There was local press coverage, all these things. And again, it came down to really just meeting with people and talking with them. I am the first person to apologize, we did not mail it through regular mail. That was about the one thing we didn't do, because in small districts, that's an expense. But that was what some people had wanted. And so, but when we got the data back in, which took several months because it had to be mined and all of that, we then invited everybody in the community to come to, I guess you'd call it a town hall. It was kind of a work session too, because we wanted to make sure that we showed them, even though that was very tricky and complex, that what we learned about our kids was going to be very helpful. Because some of the things we learned about our kids is that only 25% of them felt they had a positive adult role model in their life, right? Very low self-esteem. These all impact achievement in school. And our data was pretty common across less the one district that didn't do it. And it actually sort of mirrored Midlands in terms of trends as well. And so I apologized when I needed to, but we also stayed the course because we knew the data we were going to get was ultimately going to help our kids. And we put a lot of things in place as across our county now. We have a lot of community partners who are now working with this data to help our kids.
I appreciate you talking about informing parents on that questionnaire and stuff. Kind of tangentially, do you think it's a role of MDE to help districts learn how to hide from parents the pronouns, like if Billy is being called Susie in class, and going to the girls' restroom and locker room? Do you think it's okay that the district is hiding, or the school is hiding that from parents at parent-teacher conferences? Or?
And let me be clear, this is a follow-up question from Board Member McMillan. This is not
Sure. No, I will tell you that I've never been in a school or a district that has hidden things from parents. So I don't even know how to answer that because I've never been in a situation where, have we had students who have said, like, for example, we notice a bruise when they come in, and we, of course, are mandated reporters, and a student might say, oh my gosh, please don't tell my mom or dad that I talked to you about this because it'll get worse when I get home, right? So in those situations, we're still doing our duty. We're making the CPS referrals, right? But I can't think of a situation I've been in where a teacher has come to me as a principal or someone has come to me as a superintendent and said, I think we should hide this from a parent. I just don't think that. The teachers I know are all out there doing their best for kids. I've just never hidden anything.
So you don't think we should be doing that and helping? Let's do that.
I think every situation is unique. For example, like school counselors, they have a national governing agency with a set of ethics that would tell you that there are situations in which you don't disclose things. I don't know how we help school counselors navigate the difference between their code of ethics and other pieces. I think every situation is individualized and unique, and so I don't think there's a blanket answer for that.
The next question is, please give an example of how you built and sustained a successful partnership with a stakeholder group like unions, families, tribal nations, legislators, and what evidence can you share that made it successful?
Sure. Because you said unions, that's the first thing that popped into my head. I've done negotiations with both our teachers union and our support staff union since I've been there. One of the things that, like, I don't like square or rectangular tables. I like round tables because I don't ever want us to feel like we're on opposite sides of things. And that probably came up from when my kids were super young and had IEPs, and I hated the fact that we sat on separate sides of the table as we talked about what was going to be best for my kids. And so I think a lot of it is, again, finding that common ground. We have a remarkable, great relationship with our union in Harrison, and it's because we respect our teachers. We respect their professional judgment. We keep them in the loop on things. And when we need something from them, we are almost always successful in getting it because we show them the respect. And we all have the same mission. Again, it's about our kids being successful every single day.
Thank you.
Can you please describe where you face significant resistance or criticism from an important stakeholder group? How did you handle it, and what principles guided your actions?
So I talked a little bit before about the fact that we had to pull a work group together to move some grade levels in our school district. There was a lot of resistance from some administrators and a few teachers. And they were the ones that were going to be impacted by the move. We worked through everything, came to a board meeting. The board determined that the recommendation of the committee to do the moves was the appropriate piece. During public comment, an administrator stood up and addressed the board, told the board how wrong they were to have made that decision, how it was going to hurt kids. And so in the moment, right, here's one of my principles, standing up at a board meeting after the board's made a decision, telling the board that they made a mistake. I had to address that, obviously. Met with the person the next morning, because of course, as you guys can imagine, the board was not overly thrilled with that in that moment. They were well aware of what that principal's opinion was prior to making that determination. And I would tell you that was last February. I am still, in some ways, dealing with that administrator to continue to coach her, to say, we are going to look at what we have gained, not what we have lost in all of this. But those are continual coaching conversations that I have because she brings a lot to the table. And if I can coach her to understand what you say when and to whom and in the best way possible, we're going to be even stronger.
Thank you. Board members, make sure that your mics are on.
This is a question pertaining to literacy.
Mm-hmm.
The state of Michigan recently enacted a multifaceted literacy law, which is meant to directly assist children, particularly those in pre-K through third grade, with improving their literacy skills. Please share with us your impression and knowledge of these bills. And as state superintendent, how would you lead the department, the ISDs, RESAs, and local districts in implementing and monitoring the effects of these laws? Additionally, could you tell us what part, if any, you played in informing or providing support for these laws prior to their enactment? Please
Sure.
be specific.
Sure. So, brought my document with me just in case there were some questions on that. We used this document a lot even before those laws came in. In adopting our new resources for English language arts K-12, because we believe that quality resources in the hands of a highly effective teacher will make all of the difference for our kids' achievement. We were ecstatic to hear about the letters training. We had already had some people trained. We're looking forward to getting everybody trained. I might have the wrong 35M. Is that the one that just came out? Kind of a little alphabet soupy to me. But we were a recipient of $135,000 in our district to continue that literacy work because we know that reading is the gateway. So generally supportive of the legislation, obviously. But it's really about supporting our teachers in their learning. You can have great resources, but if that teacher doesn't get learning around how to best deploy those resources in the classroom, it won't really make a difference. And so I think that's the other place where the department can come into play of saying, we want everybody trained, and we're going to work with the legislature to get the funding to make sure everybody can be trained. Because if you say you're going to need 20 hours of training in something and there's no way to pay for that at a district level, no teacher likes being pulled out of their classroom for training, not a one. So we got to figure out better ways to say, what do we do in the summer to help teachers get trained on these pieces? And how do we create these networks across the state so it's not just the teachers in Larson Elementary School in Harrison, Michigan, but they're connected with people in the UP, they're connected with people in the Detroit area, that we build those networks for our teachers. And that goes back to the vision that I talked about the role the department can play in connecting these people. Because our kids are going to be with each other as adults. And so we need to make sure that every kid succeeds, not just the kids in my building. We need to make sure that every single kid in Michigan learns to read, loves reading. Maybe they haven't found the right book yet, but loves reading and continues to read all the way through 12th grade. And so I know the focus right now is on early literacy, but I really think it's a pre-K-12 focus. I think it's continuing that love of reading all the way as long as we have them. And that's why quality materials matter. And so I was glad to see some of the recommendations that came out about certain resources. We haven't mandated resources like some other states have. I think that is something we need to take a look at for sure, to make sure that everybody, and not every district knows how to even go about choosing a quality resource, right? If you don't have someone in your district that understands a good process to choose a resource, they're doing the best they can, right? But they're not necessarily choosing something that's appropriate because they just don't have that knowledge to know what to do. So I think that's another place where we need to say, not only are we picking these 3, 4, whatever the number is, but here's why, right? Because we know these are going to give us the biggest bang for the buck. And it isn't to say, teachers, what you've been doing for all this time was bad, right? Because that's the way teachers feel sometimes when they get a new resource or a new program. They're like, well, I guess what I was doing before, what are you telling me? I was a bad teacher? Nope. When we know better, we do better. And it's about helping them grow. Just like we help kids grow, we've got to help teachers grow. There's not a teacher out there I know that doesn't want to be their best every single day for kids. And so it's our job to make sure that they can be with appropriate resources and the training, which has to be funded, to make it happen.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up to that question as we acknowledge the concept of, literacy and funding go hand in hand. And in Michigan, we're 44th in the nation. Literacy is one of the biggest issues that we are facing that needs immediate addressing. And so as it relates to funding, school funding in Michigan is one of the most difficult models to understand in the nation. You refer to the alphabet soup. Yep. That is true. Michigan residents have communicated frustration with understanding where money comes from, where it goes. There were $87 million that were allocated for the literacy changes our state needs in the last budget. 550 of our school districts applied for these dollars. MDE approved local district budgets and selected successful applicants for the entirety of this $87 million and released the list of districts recently last month. Do you support the required reporting of approved budgets for categoricals and grants to local citizens so they can see line item spending, especially as it relates to literacy? They know their kids need to improve. They know their kids need those high quality materials. They see their districts are getting the money. They want to know that money's going to literacy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, just like when I said we can't over communicate, somewhere along the way, we've lost the public trust in education. And certainly the pandemic didn't help, okay? We've got to get that back. We have to. We have to. 20th century, American schools, success story, everybody in the world envied. 20th century, we did things in the 20th century in public education that nobody thought was possible. I would say here in Michigan, what I started to see, if I think back, sorry, I'm a history teacher, it's just who I am. I started to think back in about the 1980s when the bottom fell out of the auto industry here, and there were way less good paying jobs where you didn't need to go to college for. In fact, there were some people that would drop out of high school because that was just 1 or 2 more years of income that you were going to be able to get. You didn't need your diploma to go get that. I think we've lost our consensus as a state and as a country about the purpose of public education. I still believe it's one of the best success stories ever written. That we said as a country, we're going to educate everybody. We're not going to have a test when you come through the door. We're going to take everybody. And we still do that, right? But we also use public dollars for that. One of our guiding beliefs in Harrison, it's Hornets, it's an acronym. The last one is S, stewardship. That we're going to have good stewardship of public money. Just like we have to have trust because those parents are sending us the most precious things they have, their children, we're also funded by public dollars. And so we have to be transparent about the dollars. And I think we have to be proud about how we've spent the dollars and tell our story. It's not just data sitting on a PowerPoint slide. It's Jimmy, who's had growth in reading that nobody's ever seen before, right? And we've seen that in our district in the last year. Our NWA scores in our elementary school, my principal tells me, I've never seen growth like this. Now, would it show up on a NAEP test? I have no idea. Does it show up on MSTEP? I have no idea. I happen to love NWEA because kids are involved in it. We see growth. They set some of their own goals. Teachers get immediate data to know who and how to help in the classroom. I'm a much bigger fan of the growth model than I am the one-day test snapshot. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
The next question is about authenticity, humility, and trustworthiness. Leadership often involves acknowledging mistakes. Share an instance where you changed your mind based on new information or feedback. How did you communicate the change, and what did you learn?
So I think, again, if I think about our ELA, just sticking with the literacy and the reading pieces. The first year we launched our new resources, also as curriculum director, because we wear many hats in small districts. I was pretty adamant about, for a variety of reasons, like, nope, I don't want you just picking novels and doing novels for like six weeks, the last part of the year. Like, we really need to implement these resources with fidelity, because if we don't do it the first year, then we're never going to know what really made the difference if we start to see a positive difference. And I really stuck to that until very recently, where our secondary instructional coach came to me and said, the high school teachers really want to teach a novel towards the end of the school year. And I said, well, can we not say teach a novel? Because they're teaching readers and writers. Can we say that we're going to use a novel to help our kids learn to be better, because I know there's some real classics out there. But again, like, are we using the book just because we used it when we were in high school? So I wanted to make sure that they were really being intentional with these choices for our kids. And even my own daughter, who's 30 now, like, what came to me when she had to learn The Great Gatsby, and she's like, Mom, maybe the green light's just a green light. Why do we have to put all of this meaning into things, right? Why can't we just read to enjoy things? So, so I was really apprehensive about it because and sometimes when we give the same book to all kids, it's not right, like, stop standardizing everything. So, but I sat and listened to her, and I met with some of the high school teachers and really heard why they wanted to do this. And I said, like, could we give kids some choices, to make sure it's a good read, and let's make sure that we're pulling good, appropriate pieces. Let's make sure we're letting parents know what we're doing and why we're doing it. I'm very big on that. We always lead with our why. We always lead with our why. And so this year, towards the end of the school year, they are going to do some different pieces on that. It continues to be a work in progress because we haven't had to make any final decisions yet. But they really did change my mind because I was pretty adamant about, like, nope, we're going to just stick with the resources. You can pull readings out of there. And so I had to really reevaluate that. But again, that comes to listening to them and their why and what they wanted to, they're closer to our kids than I am. I'm in our schools all the time, but they're with them in their classrooms every day. And they're seeing a need for that. And so I listened to them.
Thank you.
How have you integrated the arts, mental health supports, or social emotional learning into the educational experience? And how do you define success beyond test scores?
When I was principal of the middle school, it was kind of a weird situation. Middle schools in Forest Hills are typically 7, 8. Our 2 K-6 feeders were busting at the seams. And they told us there was a study group. The recommendation was 6th grade moves to the middle school. But 6th grade doesn't become a middle school. Like we were running elementary still for 6th grade and then doing 7, 8. And we were attached to a high school. So we were basically running elementary, middle, and high school together, right? We were very fortunate that we had 3 brilliant people in our music department. And they used to have to either go to those K-6 schools and teach, or towards the end, those kids were being bused to our school from their feeders for music and then time back to their school. Not an overly great use of time, but still a commitment to music. So we were very happy to get our 6th graders because then we didn't have to have that lost time anymore. But it was still challenging because 6th grade music looks way different than 7th and 8th grade music, which looks very different than high school music. But credit to our teachers, they did an amazing job. But our commitment was to keep that going, to keep our arts program going, our industrial arts program going. I brought in, with partnerships, Project Lead the Way, which is a STEM-based piece there, which I also consider sort of the arts because it is about building and creating and doing those other things. I'm sad to say that in Harrison, when we lost our elementary music teacher, no matter how hard we looked and posted, we could not find an elementary music teacher. We still have not been able to find an elementary music teacher. That is one of the issues in a small and rural district when you have a specialty like that you believe is important, but you can't find a certified teacher to do it. Now, the nice thing is our teachers, of course, have tried to incorporate as much as they can into their classrooms, but it's not the same. We do have art in our elementary school, so we're very proud of that. It is a special that they get. We rotate them through art, STEM, math lab. They all take a math lab for extra numeracy, PE. There's one other piece. Sorry, I'm not remembering it right now. So we are committed to that. But I do think that's an issue. It's kind of like special ed teachers, right? We're all fighting over a very small pool of people. And if my district doesn't look attractive enough to you, because maybe there's not affordable housing, it all plays together. Again, education policy, it's housing policy, it's healthcare policy, it's everything. So you can believe in it, but if you can't find somebody to teach it, what are you going to do?
Thanks.
So, if selected for this great opportunity, you'll have the dual role of state superintendent and the board chair. How will you ensure that all the members' voices are heard and, if possible, included in key decisions? There's multiple touch points, so could you share an example or two where you had to successfully manage board versus board member conflict or board chair versus board member conflict?
Sure. So as a superintendent in our district, I don't sit as the chair, obviously, but I do offer recommendations and advice as requested. Our board doesn't always see eye to eye on everything, but I actually think that's a good thing when done respectfully, right? I think, again, like I said, I would say over 90% of the things, even as Americans, as divided as people want to think our country is right now, I think the big things, I think we actually are all pretty much in agreement on. I don't think there's somebody that would say a child should go to bed hungry. I really don't. I've never met that person, at least. We disagree on how to solve that problem. And good policy debates are a great thing to have when done civilly. I used to coach high school debate, right? That was one of the things I wanted to teach kids. You can disagree, but at the end of the day, you got to work together to make something happen. One of the things I did when I became superintendent in Harrison is I set up individual meetings with each board member. So I wanted to hear from them. I wanted to hear what was important to them. There was a lot of history I did not yet know. And everybody has their own perspective. So that's one thing that I would want to replicate because I think that's incredibly important. It's also important to know that the board only speaks through its official actions, right? Any one of you that goes out, you don't speak for the board. The board only speaks through its work here. And I think that's an important thing to remember too. Although you all have opinions and you all have public personas, this is where board decisions are made and we move forward from there. And so I think also just making sure everyone treats each other with respect is incredibly important. We are setting an example for our kids, right? Now, I doubt very many kids, if any, are watching your board meetings, right? But that shouldn't matter, right? We should still all the time, we have to lead by example. We have to show our kids, this is how adults who disagree talk with each other. And I think that's incredibly important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Having reviewed our strategic plan, please share what you believe are the top 3 priorities and tell us how you will energize both internal and external stakeholders to achieve them. And are there other priorities that you would like us to consider if we decide to review and revise that plan?
Yep, so I have it here in front of me. So I think strategic plans always need to be reviewed and tweaked. We just did one, I think it was about last August, so August of 2024, our district put in place its strategic plan. We worked with a consultant. We hadn't had a strategic plan since the early 2000s. And that was something the board told me when I was hired that was going to be a very important piece of what we did. So I think the reporting on it becomes very important to know if it's working and what may need to be changed. And looking at it, I know one of the things that I starred for myself was number 6, which was in support of students and their achievement. The Michigan Department of Education is coordinated, aligned, and properly resourced and collaborates with districts and a wide range of partners and stakeholders. I think that's the key because, again, as I said, I think the department has to lead. I know that sometimes out in the field, districts feel very disconnected from the department. It's enough blame to go around for everybody, right? Did I reach out? Did you reach out? Forget that. They feel disconnected. They don't feel part of the team for whatever reason. And I think if we focus on that, the other pieces come along. Because I think it's hard to do things like improve early literacy achievement when we may not all be on the same page. I think it's hard to say expand secondary learning opportunities for all students if we're not all on the same page. If you have 3 counselors and I have 1, and you have a counselor dedicated to helping kids find expanded opportunities, and mine is trying to keep their head above water, just getting everybody scheduled and making sure that anyone with a mental health crisis is getting the help they need. We're not expanding those opportunities for all students. So I think it's about in support, I love the language, in support of students and their achievement, right? The MDE is coordinated, aligned, and properly resourced. So I think that, would be incredibly important. I haven't seen all the metrics on this to know if there's something that specifically needs changed. I know that the number of students in AP and IB are up. I know graduation is up. We just got an email from the MDE 2-3 weeks ago congratulating us on our increased graduation scores in our district. And now my high school principal is working with the department on some things. So, because I encouraged him to. I said, I know you don't know any of these people. It doesn't matter. You need to get involved with these pieces, right? I love that we have universal meals for kids, at least through September 30th, right? We have increased funding for mental health and safety. I think that's key too, right? I said all the time as a principal and a superintendent, I really only have 2 jobs. Keep everybody safe, keep everybody learning. If you don't feel safe, you can't learn. If you're hungry, you can't learn. It's the bottom line on things. And so, But again, our kids are begging for help. They're begging for things to be different, and we got to listen to them.
Okay, the next question is on self-reflection. How would you ultimately establish your credibility to be the leader in our state in public education?
Yeah, so I think your word has to be your bond, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Truth About Leadership by Kuzi and Posner, but it's something, I actually brought it with me, but I left it in the other room because I thought, I'm like, I don't want to walk in with the book. But there's 10 things that I really adhere to being a leader that come out of that book. And if you went in there and looked at it, you would see the pages like are tabbed and all of this. The 10 things are, you make a difference as a leader. And you can choose whether that's a good difference or a bad difference, but you make a difference as a leader. Your credibility is the foundation of your leadership. Values drive commitment. Focusing on the future sets leaders apart from other people. You can't do it alone. Trust rules. Challenge is the crucible for greatness. You either lead by example or you don't lead at all. The best leaders are the best learners, and leadership is an affair of the heart because you have to be passionate and care about what you're trying to lead. I love kids. I left a very lucrative law practice to go back and be a teacher because I love kids. And I knew there was something more I was supposed to be doing in life than chasing dollars, right? People say, do you miss it? I usually joke 2 times a month. But, but in all seriousness, there isn't a day I regret that decision. There isn't a day I don't get up and say, we are going to make a positive difference today. And I think that can be done on a state level. And I think if that's the person who is out there cheerleading teachers and families and students, I'll be that cheerleader.
Please share with us your experience in dealing with IDEA federal legislation as it relates to requirements that are mandated not only for the state but also for ISDs, RESAs, and local districts. Please share with us how you would work with parents, students, administrators, and staff as challenges arise with interpretation and implementation of federal and state requirements. And additionally, please share any examples you have regarding controversial interpretations regarding students with disabilities that you have been able to assist in solving.
Okay. I'll tell you, for me, this is incredibly personal. I talked to you about my daughter. She's 30. My son is 28. Both had IEPs. Paige had an auditory processing disorder that her brain pretty much rewired itself by 2nd or 3rd grade. Andrew is a young man living with autism. Andrew lives fairly independently. He wouldn't be without all the great teachers he had along the way and social workers. Absolutely would not be where we are today. It's very personal to me, having sat at those IEP meetings as a parent. It's why, as a superintendent, I still attend IEP meetings. I try, unless it's too creepy, sit with the parent because I want them to know we're all on the same team. Having someone telling you that your child has a disability that's going to impact learning is like being punched in the gut. You cannot catch your breath. You cannot catch your breath as hard as you try. And oftentimes you have to grieve the loss of the child you thought you were going to have and embrace the child, that you do have. And my son Andrew has been such a great teacher to me for all of that. He makes me a better human, for sure. So when I approach those things, I approach them from the perspective of, what are we going to be able to do to help this child achieve at their highest potential? And yes, I hate it when dollars come into play on that. I hate it. I did one of my first IEPs when Paige was not, like maybe 3. I was still practicing law. And she wasn't old enough yet to go into Forest Hills system. So we were at an agency. And I feel like it was November or December, and we went in, and everyone at the table said to me, oh my God, we're so worried about your daughter. She's this, she's that. She's never going to be able to do this. And I remember sitting there going like, this is November or December. Like, do you have a phone here? You know, like, why did no one ever reach out to us before this time? And I said to them, it's kind of like omniscient in a way. I said, today I'm only worried about Paige, but God help you when I can worry about every other kid. All right? And that's where I feel like I am now. I'm very passionate about special ed. We have to do all we can. And so, yes, as a lawyer, a lot of times I'll sit there and help my people interpret things. I help at the ISD level as we work through things. But at the end of the day, that's a floor. That's not a ceiling. We've got to do more for kids. And I'm so proud to be in a district that does, where we treat everybody with respect and we embrace the child that they are. And if we get overwhelmed, we tap out and tap somebody else in again. So I'm sorry for getting so personal for you, but it is personal to me because I know Andrew would not be living on his own today without all of that support. And I'm just so proud. Like I said, he makes me a better human, and he makes me laugh. So, and really shows me, you know, when your child doesn't speak on time, the first time they tell you they love you, man, that's powerful. And that's what we want for every parent. We want parents to have powerful, positive moments. I wish we talked about every child talking about strengths. I remember saying in the IEP process, why don't we do this for every kid? Like, we should be doing this for every kid. What do they need to be successful, right? And they laughed at me, because what did I know, right? But that's the way I approach leadership is, what does every student need? It's not standardized. The only thing standardized is the testing, and that's a whole nother subject. But nothing about teaching and learning is standardized.
Yeah.
So I have a follow-up to that question. So, give me just a second here. Let me just summarize it. So there was an executive order in 1996. It was the 12th executive order. And it was written that the rules in special education, which used to be governed under the State Board of Education, that the authority for those special education rules would be transferred to the state superintendent. If you flash forward almost 20 years later, we're looking at being the only state in the nation that has been investigated by the federal government and Office of Civil Rights for the fact that we are in fact not providing special education the way that we should be providing it. So we've got to do better is very true. That discussion should be taking place somewhere, and there should be checks and balances to that. And our board members all agree that special education is extremely important. The question I have for you is, would you be willing to consider having the approval of those special rules returned to the authority of the State Board of Education?
I think I'm open to that discussion for sure. You know, and that would then be up to the board, you know, I mean, well, the ultimate authority in making that decision. But I think it also goes hand in hand, because you raise a great point. As I said, I'm short a special ed teacher right now. I started school yesterday. We can post every which way but up. But if I don't have candidates that apply, and I won't take just anybody, right? When we talk about the teacher shortage, the special ed teacher shortage is even more critical, I believe. And so without qualified people to help our kids, we worry all the time. Are we in compliance? Are we out of compliance? What are our caseloads look like? How are we helping? I had to emergency search somebody last year on that. That's not good for kids. But if we don't have a pipeline of good special ed teachers, we're going to continue this cycle of not being able to meet needs. And it's not, everybody starts with the best of intentions, right? But if the pool of great teachers isn't there, what are we going to do?
Very good. And those rules were also removed from the State Board of Education in the same EO.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that concludes our questions. Dr. Walton, do you have any questions for us? We have some time.
Sure. One of the questions I have is, as my LEAP has come into, speaking of executive orders, into play, and I know all of you, I believe it was 8-0, did the resolution on also having curiosity about that, let's say, about the constitutionality of that, and asked, of course, the Attorney General for an opinion, which she has basically, I think, said, well, until you have something where they've actually crossed a line, I'm not going, that's my interpretation of what I've read. We're not going to do anything. What are the real impacts that you're seeing to MDE from MyLeap in terms of the operations of the department?
I would I would hesitate to answer that question without
Okay.
MDEV being right here at the
Okay.
front and center answering that question.
All right.
Is there anyone in the room that can consider answering it? I know one of the things that each one of our candidates has suggested is that MDE is operating very slim and not just budget, but person-wise. So I'm assuming that's definitely an impact from it, but it would be
Because they
great to
took a
hear.
certain number of employees
Yes.
when they did that, yes.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Hold on. I had a couple other. As you all look at the priorities that you listed here on this, are they all non-negotiable to you? And would you place them in any certain kind of order?
I think that's a great question. And I think your point to number 6, if that's not considered, then how do you consider the rest?
I had, let me see, there might be one more. I tried to tab them. Sorry, it's kind of the old lawyer habits die hard.
And some of the questions that you asked, we may just have to reflect on them.
No, and that's okay.
Okay.
Absolutely. As I read through this piece, now I have to be honest, I did not go through all 300 and whatever pages. I just looked at the executive summary when it came out. So I think there's this perception and reality issue, right? The perception that things are dysfunctional, they're partisan, they're broken. Those were just words that I pulled out of there. On a local level, I don't see schools as being broken. I honestly see us as doing amazing things every single day. And obviously, you all commissioned the study, and then when it came out, you know, it was we agree with some things, we disagree with some things. What are the pieces that you disagree with?
So just to clarify, the MDE did not commission that in the way that people would normally think.
Thank you for that.
Something gets commissioned. The dollar appropriation was inserted by the legislature during the budget process into the MEDC budget, the Michigan Economic Development
Gotcha.
Corporation budget. So if you look at the boilerplate of that appropriation, the MDE was charged with reviewing the RFPs and then selecting the person to do the study. But the commissioning of the study was done purportedly by a legislator or whomever advocated for inserting that into the MEDC budget.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, knowing that.
Referring to the recent, what you held up was
Yep.
the recent University of
Yep, the
Michigan.
youth policy
yes.
piece.
And what I would like to have done is have someone from staff from MDE send you something that was written by myself and Dr. Rice jointly, which will answer your
I
question.
appreciate that. Thanks.
I would like to to suggest that the concept of governance is something that has repeatedly come about. One thing that hasn't changed for me since I've served on the board, it's been 9 years, is that, you know, people like their elected representation. There have been statewide surveys on that. That has not, you know, that has clearly over time and through survey, wide mass public survey, been very clear. We like our elected representation. But when you think about the issues that local school districts face every day in being able to do the great things that they do and wanting to continue to encourage that and improve things like special education and certification of teachers and all the issues that we talk about at the table every day or every month, is that we really should see the state covered in representation. But in the history of our board, most of our representation is Southeast Michigan. We had one West Michigander. I believe I'm the only Upper Peninsula Uper that's ever served on the board. So when you think about bringing the full representation of Michiganders to the table to make sure that every single kid in the state and their background and what needs to be considered and the uniqueness of all the local school districts, that actually has to show up at the table. And it has to show up in our selection of our state superintendent. That is not likely to happen unless and until the governance and education does in fact change. I'm not afraid to say that out loud. I think we need to continue to look towards what that looks like, because when we talk about diversity, that's exactly what that means.
And Dr. Walton, you've asked questions, and I just want to be clear again for the record and for those listening. You asked questions that are relevant for MDE to answer. Some of the questions relate to how we speak as a board. You brought up the 8-0 resolution, which is how we speak as a board. And what we will send you is representation of how we've spoken as a board. As Ms. Snyder spoke, she speaks as one board member. So I want to be thoughtful and careful as to how we answer the questions here today.
Absolutely. And as a lawyer, I can completely appreciate
Yes,
that.
yes.
That's all the questions I have. I guess if you don't mind, I'd just like to say something in closing if we have time for that.
Very quickly, and thank you.
So I would just say, the 7 candidates that you chose to interview, we all met the requirements on paper, right, for the interview. I hope I've shown you today that I meet those requirements in person. I really do believe we're at an inflection point in public education in our state, and frankly, I think across the country as well. I believe in our kids and I believe in our teachers. I believe in our kids' future stories. I'm a servant leader. I do have less time in the superintendent's chair than some of the other applicants that you're considering. I actually think that's an advantage, not a disadvantage. I'm only 12 years out of teaching full-time in a classroom. I have not forgotten what that's like. I'm about 6 years out of teaching one class in high school and just a couple out of having to finish up 6th grade ELA and social studies the last 6 weeks when I was principal because we couldn't find a sub. So I think my experience as a lawyer and the things I've done with government are an advantage. I believe my passion for special education is an advantage. I believe my passion in research and student voice is an advantage. And so I look forward to being invited back and exploring some more of these topics with you. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Walton, you will hear from HYA as to whether or not you are invited back and what the outcome is. Thank you for all that you do for our children in the state and
Appreciate
for
all of your
interviewing.
time today.
Thank you
very much.
Okay, thank you. Board, we will recess. We get a little bit of time, added time. We will return back at 1:45.